You might think your behavior is perfectly normal, but what if I told you that many of your everyday reactions, the way you love, think, or respond to people, might actually be echoes of old childhood wounds? From a psychological point of view, every word you say, every gesture you make reflects the world you grew up in. And for many of us, that world left a mark. There are 5 common patterns that often come from childhood trauma, and they might explain more about you than you realize. VADE 1-1. The romantic fixation pattern. Let's start with the first one, what I call the romantic brain. If you find yourself easily falling for people or constantly evaluating others as potential partners, this might be you. You meet someone of the opposite sex and almost instantly your mind starts wondering, could this be the one? If that person happens to be kind or show you a little attention, your heart races and suddenly it feels like love. You've probably heard people joke online, fell for the instructor during military training, crushed on the manager at work. Every job has its own Mr. or Miss Right. But behind those jokes, there's often a pattern. For many women, this comes from growing up without a father's love. You didn't have deep, healthy interactions with men when you were young. So, as an adult, your mind automatically romanticizes every bit of male attention. For men, this pattern can come from a different place. From being raised in a culture that objectifies women, teaching boys to see them not as people, but as things to be admired or conquered. Either way, both are born from emotional wounds, not real intimacy. Some too. The dreamer who escapes into fantasy, the second pattern, is living in fantasy. If you grew up with unmet emotional needs, chances are you learn to escape into an imaginary world. Maybe you daydream about being loved, understood, or finally chosen. As adults, we carry that same coping mechanism, just in new forms. That's why so many people are obsessed with celebrity couples or shipping fictional relationships. In psychology, we call this vicarious satisfaction. You project your desire to be loved onto someone else's love story, and watching them feels like healing your own wounds. That's also why people get lost in dream relationships, idolizing celebrities, falling into fantasy romances, or devouring stories about domineering CEOs and tragic love. Even when we know those plots are exaggerated or even toxic, they still satisfy something deep inside. The part of us that longed as children to be loved without condition. 3-3. The people pleaser, master of reading the room. Then there's the third one, the pleaser. The people who seem emotionally intelligent, always knowing what to say and how to act around others. But behind that charm often lies fear. You grew up with parents who were unpredictable, loving one moment, angry the next. So, to protect yourself, you learn to read every tone, every facial expression like a survival skill. Or maybe you were raised by relatives, always trying to earn your place by being good. In those environments, you learn to prioritize everyone else's feelings above your own. Now, as an adult, you might find yourself constantly exhausted because you're always tuned into others and disconnected from yourself. And here's the truth. People pleasers often don't truly know how to love, because love requires self-respect. If you never learn to care for yourself, you'll keep giving from an empty cup until you burn out. 4. The distracted mind, always on edge. The fourth sign, you can't focus. Your attention drifts, you get distracted easily, and no matter how hard you try, you can't stay on task. But this isn't because you're lazy or stupid. It's because your nervous system was shaped by fear. Research in neuroscience shows that children who grow up being yelled at, insulted, or hit often develop damage in the areas of the brain that regulate focus and learning. When a child lives in constant fear, their brain stays on alert, always scanning for danger, not information. That's why, as adults, it's hard to sit still, hard to study, hard to trust calmness. You were trained to survive, not to relax. And if you look at people who excel in their fields, athletes, artists, scientists, you'll notice something in common. Many of them were raised in stable, supportive homes. Because when a child feels safe, their brain can finally focus on growth, not defense. The overthinker, expecting the worst finally, there's what I call catastrophic thinking. Whenever something small goes wrong, you make a mistake at work, your partner doesn't text back, your mind jumps straight to the worst possible outcome. I'm getting fired. They've lost interest. Even when nothing's wrong, you find something to worry about. That's because, as a child, you weren't allowed to make mistakes. Your parents' tolerance for error was low, and their punishment was high. So now, your brain prepares for disaster before it even happens. It's your way of staying safe. If I expect the worst, maybe I won't be blindsided. But in truth, that kind of overprotection only traps you in fear. And I want to make this clear. I'm not telling you this so you can blame your parents or your past. This isn't about pointing fingers. It's about understanding yourself. Because when you trace your behavior back to its roots, you finally stop seeing it as who you are and start seeing it as what happened to you. And once you see that, you can begin to heal. You can rewrite those old patterns and step into the version of yourself that's no longer defined by survival, but by self-awareness and growth. The first step to healing, as psychology often reminds us, is awareness. So if any of these patterns sound like you, don't run from them. They're not your flaws, they're your history, and your history doesn't have to define your future.